Okay, so moving on from the basic template and folder structure, I want to show some very fundamental workflow and sound design practices that we do at Jaeger. Some of this might sound obvious and basic. However, I've worked with a lot of freelancers from junior to 10 years, 20 years experience, and everyone falls into some of these traps some of the time. So this video should be a kind of guide to get everybody working together and not making little mistakes that I see all too often. So the sound that I'm going to create is just an explosion. It's not going to be anything fancy. The reason I'm doing an explosion is because it covers a lot of areas that I can talk about. So some of these areas are going to be how to make variations quickly, syncing to markers, which is very important, duplicating clips and moving audio within the clips so you don't have to recut and re-edit every single time, and also using limited audio to make new variations. Additionally, I'd like to touch on how to actually mix sounds, how to make an explosion sound big, how to make something sound small, and also how to do distances. So basically how to create the effect that something is huge but really far away. You know, it has to be quiet, but it still has to sound big. Creating proportion with sound is going to be a topic, as well as how I actually create that sound and the workflow processes that I do to create that sound. Okay, so first of all, we need to find some samples. I have a whole bunch of sample packs here, and yeah, just start off with explosion. So like any sound design process, you just want to collect a whole bunch of sounds that you think are cool. We don't have to worry about layering up just yet. We just find stuff that's cool and we drag it into the project. Alright, so I'm just going to talk a little bit through my selection. So I've just chucked in all these sounds into the project. The key thing is here that I've kept all the variations from the sample pack. So for example, say I liked all these ones, I can just pull all of them in because one track, because we know we want variations. So I don't actually want a sci-fi explosion, I just want a regular one. So this is going to make our life a lot easier going forward. So in the cycle, I already know that there's huge distances that gunshots and explosions need to be heard from. So I've already gone into the project knowing that I'm going to have to probably make variations of explosions that are close and far away. So I've just selected a whole bunch of different samples that could potentially help with this process. Now the first thing is just to layer it up. And now we have our first explosion. Let's see what it sounds like. Terrible. Fantastic. So now comes down to the actual shuffling around and trying to layer these things up. Which sounds do we want people to hear the most? This one, for example, is obviously too loud. We can already see that by looking at the waveform. But let's see why I actually chose some of these samples. What does this one sound like? So this has got a really nice pop at the beginning. So a nice transient, and additionally it has a really nice tail. So this is going to be great for the distant explosions. What about this one? This sounds pretty cool in the bass register, so we can really try and get the bass frequencies coming out here. This is going to make something sound big. The bassier it is, the bigger it sounds. These two sounds are actually very similar. So for right now, I'm actually not going to use this, and I'm just going to mute it. The reason why I'm muting this and not muting the track is because it shows that I'm not sure if I even want to use it. So if, for example, I had to rush off to another project and somebody was to pick up the pieces, I know there's not much to pick up right now, but they would already see, okay, this is not something that the sound designer wanted to use, even if all the tracks are unmuted. So let's just go ahead and push this up. Let's see what this sounds like. Okay, so this is kind of like this is going to be the meatiness of the explosion. I mean, it's pretty full already. It sounds like it's sound designed. It says it's a sweetener here. However, as far as I can see, it's pretty much an entire explosion. The thing is, I don't want to use this explosion in the game because I want to create unique sound effects for the cycle. So basically what we can do here is just put this super low in the mix and just have it actually as a sweetener. And also decide exactly what frequencies we want to use from it. We know we already have a bassy frequency one, and we already know that we have a poppy high end. So maybe it's just something in the mid-range. We can think about that when we're mixing it later. What is this? So this is something that actually could just be potentially cool as like an addition for something later. So the explosion happens and then afterwards there's like a flame ball. So let's see what that sounds like. So that's already pretty cool, and that's just like layering some sounds. More importantly, it's not layering them directly on top of each other, but yeah, one after the other to give this kind of more dynamic sound. Additionally, this fireball sounds pretty big compared to the explosion. If you imagine an explosion, that's going to be the loudest thing you want to hear. Afterwards, we have the fireball. So they're mixed at a pretty similar volume here. We can check this one. It's hitting the 0, and then this one also hitting the 0. So this is when mixing starts to take effect. First of all, we don't want anything hitting the 0, so I'm just going to turn everything down here a bit. And now we have the explosion. Where is this hitting? Okay, and then afterwards the fireball. So let's just mute that down. I don't actually like this click. There you go. So now this is already something that sounds kind of cool in terms of just a distant explosion. Now we want to fill it out. So this is the base layer. Okay, so here we have the base layer. It has quite a strong transient, which I don't really want. Also, I usually have these logarithmic curves, just because I think they sound better, and it's easier to control some of the transients with these. Can you hear how the bass makes it sound more powerful and also bigger? If you listen to it without the bass, it sounds really far away, and then when you add the bass layer, it sounds scary. It still sounds far away, but it sounds more powerful. So that's something to always bear in mind when mixing things. No matter how far away they are, the more bass you add, the more powerful it sounds. Then what else have we got? It's a sweetener, and this is like a click. So this is something that kind of sounds like it should be really close. You see how something that did sound big but far away now kind of sounds like it's close? Because this sound is very, very small. And it's still very high in the mix, so this sounds like something that's happening right next to you. This sounds like something in the distance, an explosion happening far away. So when we have these two things mixed together, it creates kind of a disconnect. If we add the volume up here, it's going to sound super strange. So this actually sounds kind of cool. But basically, still there's a disconnect. It's like something that's happening in the foreground is then causing an explosion. So perhaps like a weapon shooting or something like that right up close to you. I do like this, the way that it kind of clicks into the explosion. So I'm going to keep it, but I'm going to mix it down a bit. Now just changing the volume has this effect of like, okay, something small is happening and then something big is happening. But immediately it already sounds a little bit closer with this. Then let's see what our final sweetener is saying. Alright, so now it's time to just do a little bit of EQ mastery to clean up the mix and try and bring out the sounds that we want to bring out. All right, so I was actually having a little bit of trouble deciding on if I like what I was creating. And this leads me to my first number one tip. This bar here, the volume bar, the VU meter, this should never be hitting 0 when you're creating assets. It can maybe do it once you're mastering, if you want something to be really crunchy and powerful, but it should never be hitting the 0 here. And I was creating this explosion and I wanted it to sound cool, and I kept falling into the mistake of pushing the volume up. Okay, this sounds better, you know, but it doesn't actually. So this is the number one tip. If you want something to sound louder, turn the volume up on your audio interface. And you'll be surprised how many people forget to do this, and they keep pushing their samples louder and louder and louder, and it destroys all the dynamics. So I just want to show you something that I'm kind of happy with here. So you see the volume is not peaking, and it also sounds punchy and crisp. But this is not the end of the explosion. This is basically just the popping first layer. Now there's a whole bunch of things that we can do to make it sound crunchy, explosive, and I'm going to go through some of those things.